At the holiday table, my dad said. To the one who can't seem to get their life together. My sister added. But at least he makes us feel financially better about ourselves. I took a sip and said. To the one who just sold the vacation home you've been living in rent-free. The clinking stopped. Then my mom muttered. You didn't. By the time that night came, it wasn't just another family dinner. It was the drop that finally spilled over. For my sister, it would be the beginning of the end, though she didn't realize it yet. She'd been living in the holiday home for years, rent-free, and not just any home. This was the one I bought, maintained, and quietly paid taxes on, the place they all loved to call the family getaway. But somewhere along the way, my sister decided it was hers. She acted like she was the rightful owner, like we were all coming to her house for the holidays, as if she was the one graciously hosting us out of the goodness of her heart. The thing is, that attitude didn't come out of nowhere. It was years of small, cutting remarks, sarcastic jokes about my life, and subtle reminders that in their eyes, I was the one who had never quite measured up. Even when I'd helped her out of a financial mess, twice, she still found ways to remind me that she was doing better. Better socially, better career-wise, better in every way that counted to her. And every holiday, the pattern repeated itself. Little digs from my father, a smirk from my sister, and my mother pretending not to hear. I'd always played along, because that was easier. It was easier to let them think I didn't care. But something in me had shifted over the past year. I had been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of quietly pulling away, and a lot of preparing for the day when I wouldn't just sit there and take it. That night the table looked flawless, the kind of picture-perfect setting my mother prided herself on. Candles and silver holders, spotless crystal glasses, the smell of roasted meat filling the room. My sister was in her element, sitting at the head of the table like she owned the place, telling another long story about her latest business deal, and how she was already planning the next one. I didn't bother pointing out that the down payment for her first deal had come from me, wired into her account when she'd sworn she'd lose everything if she didn't get it. When the main course was served, my father picked up his glass. He always made a toast, but his toasts weren't the warm, sentimental kind. They were performances, and I'd been his favorite target for years. He raised his glass, smirking the way he always did when he was about to land a hit. To the one who can't seem to get their life together. The familiar chuckles went around the table, the same rehearsed amusement I'd heard countless times. Before the sound even faded, my sister leaned in with a grin. But at least he makes us feel financially better about ourselves. The laughter that followed was almost reflexive for them. But this time, it wasn't going to pass. I took a sip from my glass, stood up slowly, and waited until I had their full attention. My voice was calm, almost casual. To the one, I said, who just sold the vacation home you've been living in rent-free. It was like I dropped a glass on the floor. Everything stopped. My father's smirk vanished. My sister's mouth hung open. My mother froze, still holding her fork. I sat down without another word. No explanation, no follow-up. Just silence. It stretched across the table like a heavy fog, pressing in on all of them. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. You didn't. But I had. And they would find out soon enough just how much else I was done putting up with. The morning after that dinner, the house was quiet, and for once, so was my phone. No texts. No calls. Not even the usual "great night with the family" group message my sister liked to send after every holiday gathering. Normally she'd post some overly polished photo of the table with a caption about cherishing the little traditions, pretending it was all hers to cherish. This time there was nothing. I made coffee and went about my morning without thinking much about it. If anything, the silence was almost refreshing. I didn't need to hear them trying to reframe what happened, or worse, pretending it hadn't. Still, I knew them well enough to understand this wasn't over. They were all processing, and my sister, more than anyone, was going to feel the ground shift beneath her feet. By mid-afternoon, the quiet cracked. My phone lit up with her name. I ignored it. A few minutes later, my father's name appeared, then my mother's, both going to voicemail. They weren't calling to check in. They were calling to get answers, to see if I could be swayed. What they didn't know yet was that the sale wasn't a threat, it was done. The vacation home had been listed quietly, shown discreetly, and signed over weeks ago. The deposit was sitting in my account. I told no one because I didn't want the drama until there was nothing left for them to stop. For my sister, this wasn't just losing a place to spend the holidays. She'd been living there nearly full-time for 3 years, using the address on everything from bank documents to party invitations. She'd hosted her friends there, presented it as her property, even hinted that she might renovate her kitchen. She never paid a cent for utilities, repairs, taxes, or upkeep. I'd handled every bill without fanfare. And in return, I got to sit at that dinner table and be the punchline. Around 6 in the evening, I heard the knock on my apartment door. It was sharp, almost impatient. I opened it to find my sister standing there. No perfectly styled hair, no makeup, wearing an oversized sweatshirt that looked like she'd thrown it on in a hurry. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "You can't just sell it," she said, stepping inside like she owned my apartment too. I shut the door and leaned against it, watching her pace. She asked if I was joking, if there was still time to call it off, if I understood what this meant for her. She spoke fast, almost tripping over her words. I let her go on, not interrupting once. When she finally stopped, I told her everything. How the sale was already complete. How I'd been covering her living costs for years without acknowledgement. How the house wasn't hers, never had been, and never would be again. I reminded her that I'd done it all quietly, without expecting gratitude, but also without signing up to be ridiculed in front of the family year after year. Her face lost its color. She sat down on the edge of my couch like she just realized she was in a place she couldn't control. She tried to force a laugh, said something about me overreacting, but the words fell flat. She knew this wasn't an impulsive move. It was planned, deliberate, and irreversible. The thought of losing the house wasn't just about losing a roof over her head. It was about losing the image she'd built, the story she told everyone about her life. Without that address, without that backdrop, she would have to start explaining. When she finally left, she didn't slam the door or throw any parting insult. She just left, head down, bag over her shoulder, walking quickly like she didn't want anyone to see her. I knew exactly where she was going. Straight to my parents. And when they called, because they wouldn't be calling to talk. They'd be coming here. And I was ready for them. They didn't even wait 48 hours. The knock came the next evening just after the streetlights outside flickered on. It wasn't tentative or casual. It was that heavy, deliberate kind of knock that says, "We're here to settle something." When I opened the door, both of my parents were standing there. My father's shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight. My mother clutched her purse with both hands like it was some kind of anchor keeping her from drifting away. I stepped aside without a word, and they walked in with that silent determination people have when they think they're about to talk sense into you. My father took the armchair. My mother sat at the edge of the couch like she was prepared to leap up if needed. He didn't bother with small talk. "Your sister's in shock," he said. "And frankly, so are we. This thing with the house, it's drastic." His voice had that clipped tone he always used when he thought he was the reasonable one. I told him it wasn't drastic. It was overdue. I reminded them that the vacation home was mine, bought with my money, kept up with my money, and that every single bill had passed through my hands. My mother tried to interject, saying something about how the house had become part of the family, but I cut her off. "When's the last time either of you paid for a repair? Or a single month of utilities?" She didn't answer. The silence after that was heavy. My father shifted in his seat, his foot tapping against the rug. He started in about how family sticks together, and how sometimes you just have to help each other out. I told him family doesn't mean being the permanent safety net while being mocked for supposedly not having your life together. Family doesn't mean silently footing the bill for years so someone else can live like a host in a house they never bought, only to be humiliated at your own dinner table. My mother's voice softened after that. She said maybe things had been misunderstood, that maybe they hadn't always shown enough appreciation. She used the word maybe like it could smooth the edges of everything they'd done. I didn't let it pass. I told her there was no maybe about it. They had taken me for granted, and not just once, but as a way of operating. They didn't deny it. That was the part that surprised me. They didn't make excuses or argue the facts. They just sat there, like the truth had finally caught up to them and there was nowhere to go. When they finally got up to leave, my father was the first out the door. My mother lingered for a second, looking at me like she was seeing someone different than the son she thought she could always count on without question. She didn't ask me to undo the sale. She didn't try to guilt me. She just nodded faintly and followed my father out. I stood in the doorway for a moment after closing it, feeling the quiet settle back in. For the first time in years, I wasn't on the defensive. The power dynamic had shifted. But I knew this wasn't over. My sister wasn't going to absorb the loss in silence. She had an ego that couldn't stand public cracks, and losing that house was going to leave one big enough for the whole family to see. She wouldn't come at me directly, not at first. She'd start working through the people she thought she could turn. And I was ready for that too. By the third day after the dinner, I knew my sister had gone into full damage control mode. She wasn't calling me, she was calling everyone else. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly reached out, some just checking in, others clearly trying to feel out my side of the story. They all had the same cautious tone, like they were afraid they'd step on a landmine. It didn't take long to figure out what she was telling people. In her version, I had blindsided her by selling the family home, the same one she'd helped make what it was, right out from under her. She painted herself as practically homeless, a victim of my cold, impulsive decision. She left out every single important fact, that the house was mine, bought and paid for by me, kept up entirely with my money, and that she had been living there rent-free for years while using it to elevate her image. At first I let it go. I figured the people who mattered would see through it. But then the calls got stranger. My realtor called to say my sister had shown up unannounced at one of his other property showings, cornering him in front of potential buyers. She demanded to know who had purchased the vacation home and hinted she was considering legal action. It was absurd, she had no legal ground, but it showed me she was willing to pull outsiders into this. That night, I got an unexpected knock on my door. Standing there was one of her closest friends, a woman I'd only met twice. She asked if she could talk, said she wanted to hear my side before taking anyone's word for it. I was wary at first, but then she told me something that made my stomach tighten. She had been staying at the vacation home on and off for the past few months, and my sister had told her she owned it completely. No mention of me. That friend wasn't there to defend her. She was angry, embarrassed that she'd been part of a lie. I didn't give her every detail, but I made sure she understood the truth. When she left, she said one thing that stuck with me. She's going to burn herself down if she keeps pushing this. By the weekend, cracks were already forming in her story. A cousin called to tell me they'd overheard her on the phone, yelling about people switching sides. Apparently that friend had confronted her, and instead of backtracking, my sister doubled down. She claimed I was lying to make her look bad, that I was jealous of her life. And then came the move I didn't see coming. The buyer of the vacation home, someone I'd never even met face to face, reached out through my realtor. He said my sister had shown up at his office in person. She tracked down his information somehow, walked in without an appointment, and started demanding that he undo the deal, because it was a family matter. According to him, she got loud enough that security had to escort her out. He wasn't angry at me. In fact, he was understanding, but he made it clear that if she approached him again, he'd file a harassment report. That's when it hit me. She was unraveling faster than I thought. And people were starting to notice. Not just friends. Not just family. Outsiders. Strangers. She was crossing lines that couldn't be walked back, and if she kept going, she was going to leave me with something I never had before in this situation, undeniable proof. I didn't plan on stopping her. Because sometimes, the best way to win is to let them dig the hole themselves. I had been expecting her to drag this out for weeks. She thrives on keeping things alive long past their expiration date, feeding off the reactions she gets. But the way she overplayed her hand so quickly caught even me off guard. It started with a message from my cousin, "You need to see what your sister just posted." Attached was a screenshot from a community bulletin board in the small town where the vacation home was located. My sister had written a full-length rant accusing the buyer of stealing her property. She claimed she had been tricked out of her rightful inheritance by a family member with no loyalty. She didn't write my name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she meant. She'd gone further than I thought possible. She attached photos of herself around the property, lounging on the porch with a coffee cup, posing with her friends in the kitchen, sitting on the dock in the summer. She framed them as proof of her ownership, which was laughable but also dangerous. The post wasn't just some online vent, She included the buyer's full name, the address of the house, and even the name of his business. I read it twice, knowing what this meant. She wasn't just trying to paint me as the villain anymore, she was dragging an innocent third party into her mess. The fallout began almost immediately. The buyer called me that afternoon. He was calm, but I could hear the irritation in his voice. "I've had clients calling me all day asking what's going on. She's making me look like a criminal," he said. Then, after a pause, "If she keeps this up, I'm going to have my lawyer file for a restraining order. And if I have to sue for damages, I'll need you to testify." I told him I understood and that I'd stand by him. And then, for the first time in this whole ordeal, I decided to pull my parents directly into the fire. I called them and told them everything, about her post, the attached photos, the buyer's name being broadcast to strangers, and the potential legal action. I expected pushback, maybe even excuses. But instead, there was just silence on the line. Then my father finally said, "We'll talk to her," in a tone that didn't sound confident at all. That night, my mother called me back. Her voice had none of its usual edge. She told me they'd confronted my sister, and it had gone exactly as I expected. She blew up, accused them of siding with me, and stormed out. My mother admitted something I'd never heard from her before. "I think you were right. This was never just about the house." And then came the twist I didn't see coming. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from my sister. No screaming. No accusations. Just a flat, tired voice saying, "I need to talk to you. Alone." She didn't say why. But I knew. She'd felt the shift. She'd realized that every move she made from here on could be used against her, not just by me, but by someone outside the family with legal leverage. For the first time in years, she wasn't in control. And I wasn't about to hand that control back. 3 days after her voicemail, she showed up at my door. This time there was no rapid, impatient knock, no air of command in her posture. She just stood there, half-shadowed behind the frosted glass, waiting. I opened the door and stepped back without a word. She came inside like someone who wasn't sure they'd be welcome. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd had countless quiet breakfasts alone. She kept her hands clasped, her eyes moving around the room but never really meeting mine. For a while neither of us spoke. It wasn't just awkward silence. It was the kind that fills the space when both people know the power dynamic has shifted. When she finally spoke, the words came slowly. She didn't apologize, not outright, but she admitted she'd let things get out of hand. She claimed the post about the buyer was written in anger, that she had deleted it, and that she never meant to cause trouble for him. She said she was embarrassed, that she'd been under a lot of stress. I didn't interrupt. I let her spill everything. All the explanations that weren't quite admissions, all the excuses that didn't change the facts. When she was finished, I told her plainly what was going to happen moving forward. No more unspoken financial favors. No more borrowing, that was really taking. No more living in anything I owned. If she wanted something, she'd have to pay for it herself. If she tried to pull me into public drama again, I'd cut contact entirely. No second chances, no negotiations. She didn't argue. She didn't try to soften me with a joke or turn it back on me like she usually did. She just nodded once, her eyes fixed on the table like she couldn't stand to look at me while agreeing. When she left, I closed the door and thought, that's it. It's done. The house was gone, my role as the family's silent bank was over, and she'd been forced to face boundaries she couldn't bend. But a week later, I learned that wasn't the full story. The buyer of the vacation home called me unexpectedly. I braced myself, thinking there was another problem, but instead he thanked me for keeping the situation from spiraling further. Then he mentioned something I didn't expect. My sister had contacted him directly again. Not to harass him this time, but to ask if he'd consider selling the property to her. Once she got the funds together, she'd offered to pay full market value. The irony was, she didn't have anywhere near the amount she'd need. She would have to find investors, take out loans, or, and this part made me almost laugh, ask our parents for help. I could imagine the conversations already, the mental gymnastics she'd used to frame herself as the rightful owner fighting to get back what was hers. That's when I realized she hadn't learned the lesson I thought she had. She wasn't moving forward. She was still looking backward, still trying to rewrite history, still convinced that if she pushed hard enough, she could undo what I'd done. But for the first time, that wasn't my problem to solve. She could fight, beg, or scheme all she wanted. I wouldn't be part of it. I had stepped out of the role they'd kept me in for years, and I wasn't stepping back in. The real ending wasn't her losing the house. It was me walking away from the part I'd played in enabling her for so long. And in the silence that followed, I realized something I hadn't expected. It wasn't anger or bitterness I felt. It was relief. The update. 2 weeks of quiet. No texts. No calls. No snide group messages from my sister, no family updates. From my mother, no veiled requests for favors. At first, it felt strange, like the silence was just a pause before another round. But as the days passed, I started to think maybe this really was the end. Then, on a gray Thursday morning, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. It was the buyer of the vacation home. I figured it was something small, maybe a question about forwarding mail or leftover maintenance details. But his first words cut through any sense of calm I'd built up. "I think you'll want to hear about this." The night before, my sister had been spotted back in the town where the house was. She didn't call him, didn't knock on the door, didn't ask permission. Instead, she went straight onto the property. The house was mostly empty. He was still moving in, but that didn't stop her. She tried the back door first, fumbling with something in her hand. When it wouldn't open, she walked the perimeter, peering through windows, testing the handle on the shed. Neighbors recognized her instantly. Most of them had known me as the owner for years, and when they saw someone circling the property after dark, they didn't hesitate. One of them called the police and told them she was the previous owner's relative, but shouldn't be there. Another neighbor, who happened to have a security camera facing the yard, caught the whole thing on video. By the time the police arrived, she was gone. But she wasn't invisible. Her car was seen leaving the street, and the footage was clear enough that there was no question it was her. The buyer explained that he wasn't pressing criminal charges, at least not yet, but he had already filed a formal trespass notice with the local authorities. And here was the detail I didn't see coming. In the process, the police had called my parents to verify her contact information. That meant the story couldn't be spun. No way to frame it as a misunderstanding or just checking on the house. The police had her on video, the neighbors had made the call, and the timeline was exact. That night, my father called me. He didn't sound angry this time, or defensive. Just tired. "She's done, Andrew. This isn't something we can cover for." No speech about family unity, no suggestion to work it out, no attempt to deflect. It was the first time he'd said something about her behavior without trying to make me shoulder any of the blame. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Just 3 words. "You ruined me." I read it twice, then set the phone down without answering. Because I hadn't ruined her. She'd done that herself, step by step, decision by decision, convinced she could twist every situation to her advantage. All I'd done was stop playing the part she'd written for me. And that was the final break. No more obligations. No more being the quiet one who absorbs the hits. No more letting their version of family dictate my place. When the silence returned, it wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It felt like space I could finally use for my own life. For the first time in years, I wasn't enduring anything. I was free from it. And I knew, deep down, there was no going back. Second update. It's been a month since the trespassing incident, and things have settled in a way I never imagined. My parents haven't tried to mediate, or drag me into another family talk. My father, true to his word, stopped covering for her. My mother has been quieter than I've ever known her to be. They still speak to her, but from what I hear, it's strained. She's been couch-hopping between friends' places, trying to convince someone to back her idea of getting the house back. No one's biting. The buyer did end up taking the next step. Last week, he filed a formal restraining order against her. I wasn't required to testify. The police report, the neighbor statements, and the security footage were enough, but the court date came and went without much fuss. She didn't even show up. The order went through in her absence, which says a lot about where she's at now. Here's the part one didn't expect. The buyer called me afterward, not to talk about her, but to thank me. He said something I haven't been able to shake. It's rare someone cuts ties with this kind of drama before it destroys them. Most people don't know when to stop paying for someone else's chaos. It was strange, hearing it from someone who barely knew me, but it landed in a way my own family's words never had. As for my sister, the last I heard was through a mutual friend. She's telling people she's starting fresh in another city. I don't know if that's true or just another version of her story. I don't care enough to find out. What I do know is this: I didn't just sell a house. I sold the last piece of ground she could stand on while talking down to me. I closed the door on years of being the safety net, the backup plan, the silent provider who was still somehow the family joke. Now, my life is quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like waiting for the next blow. I've got my weekends back, my head clear, and my money going toward things that actually matter to me. I think the final surprise in all of this is that I'm not angry anymore. Not at her, not even at my parents. I'm just done. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like winning.